Well, hello there, YouTubers. So today I want to make a video on the basics of how to attack a problem that you may get in more of an academic environment. In the real world environment, it's a little bit different, but for the most part, when you get assignments in school, you typically end up getting assignments that you have to understand and you have to learn how to break it down. There are a few problems with attacking the problem or finding a solution to the problem because there are certain things you may not know. That's what this video is about, and that's what I'm going to try and help you with so that you can understand how to break the problem down better. So if you watch this video, you're going to be a lot further ahead, a lot more able to attack the problem and solve it better. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do, you want to understand those requirements. So you want to read them from top to bottom. You may have to read them more than once. And you want to be able to understand those requirements. Exactly what are the requirements? What are the restrictions? What are the constraints? What things are you allowed to use? You may not be allowed to use certain concepts that you haven't learned yet or that you haven't touched up in class. You want to make sure you understand all of that. You also want to understand what your inputs are, how the input is going to be configured, all those things you want to understand, and what your requirements for the output and what you're going to have to turn in. Make sure you understand all of that. From that, you want to list all the facts. What do you understand? We have files. We have several input files. We have to be able to get them from the command line. We may need to output a file or output more than one file. It has to be a certain format. Maybe numbers have to be formatted a certain way. Certain data that we must gather. List all your facts that you know on a separate piece of paper or separate digital document so that you know what the facts are. There's going to be assumptions that you make. So if you have assumptions, you assume that the records will never be longer than 80 characters, or you may assume that the file will never be larger than a certain size. Make sure you list that. But one other thing is you want to verify those assumptions. So you may have to come back, and if you're making an assumption, you want to know that it's an assumption and ask questions, ask your instructor questions to see if that needs to be clarified and to make so that way you can make sure you meet your requirements. Another thing you want to do is right off the bat, you may have questions. Where does this file come from? I don't see the data in the way that it's structured. Or maybe you want to know if you're required to create your own collection classes, your own stacks, your own queues, your own lists, or maybe you can use the template library or the framework of choice. You want to make sure you ask those questions, list them down so that then you can send them over to your instructor. Your instructor can now provide those answers, or maybe the TA can answer them for you. So make sure you have a list of questions. List the concepts. What are the concepts that you need to understand for this? Or do I need to read a file? Do I know how to read a file in this language? Do I need to write a file? Do I know how to output that file? Do I need to sort anything? And how am I going to sort this? Do I need to parse anything to be able to get the data properly? List all these concepts so that then later on you can research them and make them work in that language. Another thing to do is diagram your objects. And in this case, you want to think of UML. Now, most languages are object-oriented. These days, they're object-oriented. So it's important that you know some basics of UML. How do you list a class? How do you draw a class? How do you draw inheritance? How do you draw references? Things like that, because you're going to need to think in terms of objects. So for example, if you have a record and you're reading student records, well, that's a data object, and you're thinking of data. So that object should be responsible for holding the data for that student. Whereas maybe you have something that parses that student record. Well, maybe you need another class that is just a parser that reads the line and takes the information out of it. Maybe there's grades and you store it. And that parser will help you transform from the data in maybe a string or a string record over into your object. So think in terms of UML and learn the basics. I really do recommend that you learn the basics of UML because it'll go a long way in learning in helping you attack these problems. Know the basics of string functions. And when I say this, I don't mean to say it in that particular language that you're in. Just know about them, because string functions are very useful in solving these types of problems that are academic, and you want to be able to know to, like, how do I do certain things with strings? For example, some examples of string functions are like split. That means you take a string and you can take the individual pieces out of it. For example, let's say you have a sentence, the boy walked the dog, and you can take each individual word, and if you split the string, you'll have an array or another collection of words, the boy walked the dog, as individual words, and now you can work with those individual words. So know the basics of string functions. There's also, if you want to ignore case sensitivity, for example, you may want to know about to lowercase to uppercase, or maybe you want to extract a substring out of that string. So you want to know about substring. How do you do that in the particular language that you're in? Or there's other cases where you may need to find if a word exists within that string and you want to get at that word, or maybe the character. So you want to know about substring. But there's many, many other string functions, and it's just a matter of like thinking in terms of strings. How do I do these operations on this string? So know about those string functions, and then you can research, well, how do I do it? Because Google's going to be your friend, and you can say, well, how do I do this in this language? Every language has them. It's just a little bit different. If you take something like C, it may be very, very primitive approach compared to something like C# or C++. So you want to know about those string functions. How do I convert it? How do I count the characters? How do I extract the character at this position? How do I count the individual characters out of the string? All those different string functions, make sure you know about those, because then now that you have that knowledge, you don't have to memorize them. You can just Google how they work. Another thing you want to know about basic collections. Every language has them. If they don't have them, you can create your own, and know if, you have to ask the question, are you authorized to use these string functions? You want to know about them. For example, some common, not string functions, but collections. Some common collections are, for example, dictionaries or maps. In some languages, they call them maps. In some other languages, they're dictionaries. But that's like a pairing. Like you have, for example, a word or a key and a value. For example, your student record may be stored in a collection by student ID, and then you have all the entire student record as the value. And that allows you to do certain things. In other cases, you may store the key, like for example, the word, and how many times it appears in there. So you may have just a count. So that's an example of a dictionary of a map. In other cases, you just want a listing of them. You want to have a collection so that you can later sort them or something. For example, an array or a vector or a list. They call them different things in different languages, so know about them. The other things are like queues. Maybe you want to process things in certain order, maybe first in, first out, you would use a queue. Or if you want to use something like a stack, where maybe you need to, it's a backtracking algorithm, where maybe you need to sort things in the stack, but maybe you need to pop them off and add them as you go. And that's like for calculators or for mazes, puzzles, you will need to know how to use a stack. And are you allowed to use them? All these are basic, simple data structures. And if you had to create your own, it takes you a little bit more time, but for the basic functionality that you need, it's not really that much effort, maybe an hour or two at most to create each one of these. So, make sure you know about these collections in the language that you're working in, and then you can search how do you do what with these collections. So it's important to know about the basic collections that exist in every language. Some languages have them, some don't. Like for example, if you go to C, you may have to create your own or use a third-party library to create them, whereas other languages like C++ have the standard template library. The other languages like C# already have them as part of their framework. They have dictionaries and maps and queues and so on. And other languages like Java, same thing, is pretty similar to C#. They already have them. So know about those basic collections because you're going to need them. Now, you want to break down the problem into pieces. What are the things that you have to understand? I need to sort this. I need to parse this. I need to process this. What's my algorithm going to look like? You should be able to solve the algorithm in a brute force approach, probably on paper, before you even decide to put it down on code or maybe in pseudocode, because you can waste a lot of time trying to debug and trying to make things compile when you haven't really even understood the problem and been able to solve it. So break down your problem into pieces that'll help you organize, and then you can start thinking of objects in that sense. If all else fails and you gave it a try, there's always online tutoring. I know one popular one is Wyzant, and you can go to Wyzant and you can get help. And what I would do personally is I would try to break down the problem, and those things that I get stuck on or that I don't understand, I would get help with. I wouldn't try to go there to get my whole entire problem solved by the tutor. I would just say, hey, look, I need help in this. And the reason for that is because maybe the teachers, they don't have don't have as much time to help you. So if you get that tutoring, make it count, get that help that you need. So here are those 10 things that I think that you can use to help you break down a problem better, help you attack it better. And let me know what you think. If you like this video and want to watch more videos like this, hit that like button and subscribe. If you have a question or a comment, please leave it down below. I appreciate it all. It's great feedback, and I hope you liked it. Thanks for watching.